Happy Sabbath. I hope you all had a wonderful week and enjoy the cool weather and some rain. Tonight I continue to ask the Lord to bless you with His abundant love, with joy, with peace, and that He will protect you and your family from harm, from danger, from sicknesses. Last 2 weeks, we talked about Ellen White's first vision. And remember, I mentioned that her first vision was given 2 months after the Great Disappointment. What is the Great Disappointment? The Advent people, about 50,000 in all in Portland, where Ellen was, and approximately 100,000 if adding those who were scattered across the northeastern portion of North America. They believe in the interpretation of the prophecy Daniel 9 by a preacher called William Miller that October 22nd, 1844 would be the day that Jesus returned to earth to take his faithful ones to heaven. We know that it didn't happen, and the Advent believers were very disappointed. How disappointed were they? Let me read you a quotation from someone who was there waiting for Jesus to come. This person, along with many, waited for Jesus' appearance from sunrise to midnight. And this is what he said. Our fondest hopes and expectations were blasted, and such a spirit of weeping came over us as I never experienced before. It seemed that the loss of all earthly friends could have no comparison. We wept and wept till the day dawned. He continued, and I paraphrase part of it. He said, I wonder in my heart, saying, my Advent experience has been the richest and brightest of all my Christian experience. If this had proved a failure, what was the rest of my Christian experience worth? Is not the Bible foolproof? Is there no God, no heaven, no golden home city, no paradise? Is all this but a crafty dream of fable? Is there no reality to our fondest hope and expectation of these things? Is all at loss? And therefore we really had something to grieve and weep over. And as I said, we wept till the day dawned. The following months, from the early winter months of 1844 until 1845, the Advent believers in Portland, Maine, in fact elsewhere, seldom smiled. On the streets, they were being sneered at, insulted at, and mocked by their former friends and acquaintances. They tell them, you were a set of fools and fanatics. Or some would tell them, I told you so. So, what happened to the Advent believers after the Great Disappointment? After the Great Disappointment, some left the movement, but most of them who were left, including Ellen White, thought that there was a miscalculation and that they should keep looking for the fulfillment of 2300-day prophecy at another day, some near future day. And so they frequently gather in each other's home, praying and searching for more light. God would not leave his people in the dark. He always provides lights to inform his people the truth. Remember these 2 scriptures? Amos 3:7, surely the Lord does nothing unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. Another scripture in 2 Corinthians 36:15. The Lord God of their fathers sent warnings to them by his messengers, rising up early and sending them because he had compassion on his people. So God was revealing something to them. They just misinterpreted part of the 2300 days prophecy. Because of this, 2 months after the Great Disappointment, Ellen White received the vision, which I already told you the last weeks, to help them understand their experience. Just now I mentioned that most of the Advent believers believed Jesus was going to come in their near future. But Ellen's vision given in December at Elizabeth Haynes' home did not indicate that there was going to be another set day in the near future. They were surprised. Nevertheless, the vision proved to them that the Advent believers were not delusional and that God had been leading them all along. The light in the vision was shining on the pathway to the new city, heavenly home. Remember, the light symbolized the midnight cry, alluding the parable of the 10 virgins who at midnight heard a cry saying, "The bridegroom is arriving." So the midnight cry is a proclamation of Jesus' second coming. And the Advent people were told that if they trusted this light and kept their eyes fixed on Jesus, who was in front of them, they would travel safely until they entered their heavenly home. And that was in Ellen's vision, right? You remember? But the mistake they made was they thought October 22nd, 1844 was the end of their journey to heaven. The vision shown to Ellen suggested the Advent people were at the beginning of that pathway. So therefore, Ellen's vision answered most of the Adventists' question of whether the experience was led by God and that they were not delusional. Their study was with sound scriptural support and with the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So what was Ellen, a 17-year-old girl who had just given a vision, to do? God told her to tell the others about her vision. That wasn't an easy task. The vision she received had information that was contrary to her own thinking and also contrary to what the Advent believers generally believe in the Portland area. In recounting that experience 2 years later in her letter to Joseph Bates, who was one of the pioneers of the Adventists, she told him that God instructed her to deliver the message to the disappointed group of Advent believers. And she was intimidated by such a big, huge responsibility. So she initially shied away from it. She was so afraid. Well, she was only 17 years old, young, weak physically. She thought no one would believe her. So instead of remaining at home, because a Bible study and prayer meeting was about to happen at that night, she didn't want to face the believers and having to share with them her vision. So she got into a sleigh and rode 3 or 4 miles away to the home of a friend. There she hid. She thought she could avoid her responsibility. Knowing how the Adventists in the Portland area regard about October 22nd experience, she was afraid what they would say about her vision, a vision that presented a different perspective from their belief. But unexpectedly at her friend's home, she found Joseph Turner visiting there. He was the leader of the Adventists in the Portland area and an important Millerite editor. He asked her whether she was in the way of her duty, meaning whether she was fulfilling her duty. You see, he had heard about her vision and knew that she was going to share it to the believers. She knew she was escaping from her duty, so she ignored his question and quickly went upstairs to a friend's bedroom. There she stayed there for a while until Joseph Turner went to the room and asked her again. Let me read. This is what Ellen wrote. When he came up, he asked if I was to be at the meeting that night. I told him no. He said he wanted to hear my vision and thought it duty for me to go home. I told him I should not. He said no more, but went away. She had not yet told any of the believers what God had shown her. Besides the little group, I suppose, when she was praying, the little group in Elizabeth Haynes' home. Well, Ellen was distressed. She could feel it both in her body and her mind on that day. She felt God was far away from her, and she even thought he had left her. So she prayed earnestly about the matter. Finally, she promised God that if he would give her strength to ride home that night, she would, at the first opportunity, deliver the message he had given her. Remember, Ellen was very weak, so riding a sleigh for 3 or 4 miles required more strength than she had at that time. Sure enough, God gave her strength. She rode home that night, but it was too late for that meeting. When she got home, the people already left. Not a word was said to her by her family about the meeting or what was presented or how many people attended. And she later learned that only a very few people were present. But at the next meeting held in her parents' home, which was only a few days later, she related to everyone in the meeting, careful detail of what had been shown to her in the vision. What a relief this brought to the Adventists in Portland. They didn't reject her message. They knew Ellen, they knew her family. They had heard that a vision had been given to her. And when they heard it from her own lips, they accepted that. They accepted what she told them as message from God. The vision met a need in their experience. The meeting that Ellen didn't attend, in fact, was poorly attended. Only very few people were there. But the meeting that she spoke, which was a few days later, the one that I just mentioned, was attended with about 60 people. As the Harmon's home, which is Ellen's home in Portland, was very small, it couldn't accommodate this many people, so arrangement was made for a larger place so she could relay her vision to everyone. So the Advent people in Portland accepted the vision and through it regained the confidence in the fulfillment of prophecy concerning October 22nd, 1844. About 1 week after this meeting, the Lord gave her another vision and showed her that in spite of trials, she must go and relate to more people about what God has shown her. She would meet great opposition and suffer distress, but the angel told her, "The grace of God is sufficient for you. He will sustain you." Sure enough, as she went from meeting to meeting to meeting to share her revelation by God, there were people who didn't believe her. They didn't believe that God would give vision to this young teenager. Many thought that she was delusional, and some other people thought that she was being hypnotized. But we know God had chosen Ellen Harmon, later Ellen White, to be his messenger. And there were eyewitnesses that could testify to her experience. I will read you the following accounts. These accounts are from eyewitnesses who were present during the time that Ellen was having her vision. The first person was J.N. Loughborough. This is what he said. I will state some facts relative to the visions. The first time I saw Mrs. Ellen G. White, formerly Miss Harmon, was in October 1852. On that day, I saw her in a vision that lasted over 1 hour. Since that time, I have had the privilege of seeing her in vision about 50 times. I have been present when physicians have examined her while in this state, and I consider it a pleasure to bear testimony to what I have seen and known. Some were suspicious of her, and they were those who have never seen her while she was in this condition, the physical condition while she was seeing a vision from God. And this person, Mr. Loughborough, continues. In passing into vision, Ellen gives 3 rapturing shouts of glory, which echo and re-echo. The second, especially the third one, gets fainter and even more, with more excitement than the first. And the voice resembling of one like quite a distance from you, just going out of hearing. She's going further and further away. For about 4 or 5 seconds, she seems to be dropping down, like a person who is fainting or fainted, or a person who has lost his strength. And she then seems to be instantly filled with superhuman strength again, sometimes rising at once to her feet and walking about in the room. And there are frequent movements of her hands and her arms, pointing to the right and to the left as her head turns. So all these movements are made in a most graceful, meaning moving naturally, not awkwardly. In whatever position the hand or arm may be placed, it is impossible for anyone, who is watching to move it. Her eyes are always open, but she doesn't blink. Her head is raised, and she is looking upward, not with a blank stare, but with a pleasant expression. She appears to be looking intently at something, as some object that is far, far away. She doesn't breathe, and yet her pulse continues to beat regularly. And she doesn't breathe, as I mentioned, but yet her face is rosy color, as if the oxygen is still present. So Ellen's condition, as described by this Mr. Loughborough, about breathing, about loss of strength, about being made strong, all suddenly, it all agreed perfectly with the description by Prophet Daniel of his own experience while he was in vision. Let me read to you. This is what Daniel said. He said, "Therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me in corruption, and I retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? As for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man. And he strengthened me and said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee. Be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me." So that is exactly like Ellen White's experience, isn't it? Now I'm going to read another account And this one is by a doctor, Dr. Killa. A description of a vision given in Michigan, May 29, 1853, at a meeting held in Tyrone, Livingston County. He said, Sister White was in vision about 20 minutes or half an hour. As she went into vision, everyone present seemed to feel the power and the presence of God. And some of us did indeed feel the Spirit of God resting upon us mightily. We were engaged in a prayer and social meeting Sabbath morning at about 9 o'clock. Brother White, my father, and Sister White had prayed, and I was praying at that time. There had been no excitement, no demonstrations. We pleaded earnestly with God, however, that He would bless the meeting with His presence and that He would bless the word in Michigan. As Sister White gave that triumphant shout of glory, 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 which you have heard her give so often as she goes into vision, Brother White rose and informed the audience that his wife was in vision. After stating the manner of her visions and that she did not breathe while in vision, he invited anyone who wished to do so to come forward and examine her. And this doctor, his name is called Dr. Drummond, a physician who was also a First-day Adventist preacher, who, before seeing her in the vision, had declared that her vision was of mesmeric origin. That means she was hypnotized, and that he himself could give her a vision. So this physician, Dr. Drummond, stepped forward, and after a thorough examination of Ellen, he turned very pale and remarked, "She doesn't breathe." So Dr. Killa continued, "I'm quite certain that she did not breathe at that time while in vision, nor in any of several others which she has had when I was present. The coming out of the vision was as marked as her going into it. The first indication we had that the vision was ended was in her again beginning to breathe. She drew her first deep breath, long and full, in a manner showing that her lungs had been entirely empty of air. After drawing the first breath, several minutes passed before she drew the second, which filled the lungs precisely as did the first. And then a pause of 2 minutes and the third inhalation, after which the breathing became natural." And this is written by Dr. Killa, a physician, in December 28, 1890. The third witness account by F.C. Castle. So F.C. Castle witnessed a medical examination of Mrs. White while she was in vision at Stowey, Vermont in the summer of 1853. And this is what he says. A physician was present and made such examination of her as his wisdom and learning dictated. To find the cause of the manifestation, a lighted candle was held close to her eyes, which were wide open. Not a muscle of the eye moved. He then examined her in regard to her pulse, and also in regard to her breathing, and there was no respiration. The result was that he was satisfied that it could not be accounted for on natural or scientific principle. He signed F.C. Castle. The fourth account on another witness called D.H. Lamson. And this description of D.H. Lamson relate to an examination made while Mrs. White was in vision in a meeting held in the home of Elder James White in New York, Rochester, New York, June 26, 1854. So this Mr. Lamson said, I was then 17 years old. It seems to me I can almost hear those thrilling shouts of glory which she uttered. Then she sank back to the floor, not falling, but just sinking gently, and was supported in the arms of an attendant. 2 physicians came in, an old man and a young man. Brother White was anxious that they should examine Sister White closely, which they did. A looking glass, which is a mirror, was brought, and one of them held it over her mouth while she talked. But very soon they gave this up and said, she doesn't breathe. And then they closely examined her sides, the side, as she was speaking, trying to find some evidence of deep breathing. But they didn't find it. As they closed this part of the examination, she rose to her feet, still in vision, holding a Bible high up, turning from passage to passage, quoting correctly, although her eyes were looking upward and away from the book. And he continues, she had a view of the 7 last plagues. Then she saw the triumph of the saints, and her shouts of triumph I can seem to hear even now. To these facts I freely testify. Signed, Elder Lamson, February 8, 1893. So these were the eyewitness accounts, those who were present when Ellen White was in a vision. And there were more. So next week, I will continue with her biography, her journey, her mission, her service, her visions. Happy Sabbath.